This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Spoopy noises.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
We are making spoopy noises about Guildbook Sandmen. So, from a different shelf in the library from the usual Changeling stuff, but adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one of the most adjacent books, actually.
Yeah, like it's both. They talk about Changeling crossover from another World of Darkness game, and it makes sense to talk about Changeling crossover in that World of Darkness game for that section.
Right? Like, there
Yeah.
are more words about how this splat feels about Changelings than basically any other, I think.
Yeah, more than they feel about vampires or mages or whatever. And also, it's not like Malkavians where you're like, I guess. Like you actually go, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. So we should probably, for anyone who isn't familiar with Wraith the Oblivion, we should probably just briefly touch on what exactly that game is. I actually have not played it, but I am going to hopefully, as of this recording, I am making a character for a game. Hopefully by the time this episode goes out, the game will have started.
I have never played it either.
It's the Wraith Curse.
Yeah, well, no, I hope I don't get the Wraith Curse. That's a whole other...
Oh, no. Well, no, so I just mean it seems to be impossible for people to sustain a game or podcast about Wraith. That aspect of the curse.
Not the curse where if you develop a Wraith corebook or something, your life will die, like fall apart, and multiple
not that part.
members will get sick, and
yeah. No, we'll skip that. But yeah, so the premise of Wraith is you're dead. You're living in a weird and somewhat feudal afterlife that reflects the living world.
Yeah.
Trying to resolve unfinished business as ghosts do before the dark side of your psyche tries to drive you into oblivion.
Yeah.
Or the random storms get you. Or you break the underworld's laws and you get turned into an ashtray.
Yeah. And some of this depends on location, even more than Changeling. They've very specified pretty early on, like, this part of the world's like this in Wraith, and this part and they can be quite different types of places, and it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. Probably content warnings for things like slavery, body horror, psychological horror. Yeah. One of the sort of landmark mechanics about the game is that another player within the group plays your shadow, which is like that voice in your head that tries to undermine you and occasionally seizes control and does bad things, which is innovative and intense for a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's multiple ways of doing it, they suggest, but that is the one. Each player plays a psyche, which is like the, I don't know, acceptable part of
the nice ghost.
And then that player also plays someone else's shadow, and you go all around, which they actually have something similar for when you're playing specters, which is when it's reversed, but that's an even darker game.
Yeah.
But there's also rules. It's like maybe one person just only plays shadows, everybody's shadows, or somebody, or the ST plays them, or whatever. But
the game that I'm going to be in will be recorded over Zoom, and so we're kicking around the idea of having the shadow parts be like you change your camera to high contrast black and white, and then you're the shadow. So we'll see how that goes.
That seems hard from a logistical standpoint of planning it, but unless you're editing it after the fact. But
yeah, it's not going to be in real time.
Okay.
But anyway, I don't want to say too much before it actually happens.
Yeah.
The Wraith Curse. Other things in the game that are kind of changeling-ish is that you sustain yourself on pathos gathered from emotional connections, kind of similarly to glamour.
Yep.
The underworld has the hierarchy, which is like the big bureaucratic imperialist thing that oversees everybody. So a little bit of the, not necessarily noble and commoner distinction like you have in Changeling, but there's definitely the haves and have-nots.
It's like if the she and the technocracy merged or something.
Ugh. And then there are the guilds, which I've actually never been clear on this aspect, so I don't know if you know more about it. But
actually, this book kind of gets into it. Actually, I think explains it pretty good.
Well, it does, but so my understanding is that like your splat in Wraith is essentially your occupation. You're not defined by what you look like or what your origin is or whatever. It's just what you do.
And even then, it's probably the weakest splats of any World of Darkness game. Like, even less so than like Tradition or whatnot in Mage. Like, I think you could be legitimately a Wraith who's not really has a splat. You're just
right.
You've got some Arcanoid you do, but you're not like particularly in one area.
There's not really a penalty for going solo the way there is in a lot of other.
Yeah, like you still got to be in a group with your PCs, but that's right, and there's lots of different, and all the groups feel more like, I don't know, you personally, Puka, what groups do you belong to? What groups do I belong to? Like, I have a job and I have groups of friends and we do a podcast together. Like, that's more what the Wraith groups feel like to me than like Sealy Court or Redcap or whatever.
Yeah. Should we just read the C20 description, like the little short paragraph or two? I have it open.
Sure.
In case. So here's what C20's perspective is on Wraiths. The Slua describe how any mortal that dies with business left unfinished risks metamorphosing into a form of Prodigal. Slua once espoused Wraiths as some form of decaying passion chimera, though others scarcely believe this rumor these days. The passion possessed by a Wraith is heightened further than that of a simple mortal, as the deceased's longing comes to define and strengthen the Wraith. Rather than decaying, Wraiths are chimera with unmatched focus. Their reality known as the Shadowlands traps most of the dead. The realm is created by their dreams of life and what could have been. That doesn't mean they're incapable of interfering with the realms of the living. Fae normally encounter Wraiths accidentally by interacting with the Wraith's fetters or passions. Fetters are physical things of sufficient importance to the Wraith. The knife that killed him, a prized car the Wraith spent years repairing in his mortal days. Anything could be a fetter. Passions are the driving emotions that make a Wraith more than a static, haunting ghost. Regret for not seeing his daughter graduate, hatred for the company that fired him. These powerful feelings compel a Wraith to action. If a Changeling interferes with something important to the Wraith, she can expect to receive a visit from a potentially furious spirit, or perhaps a grateful one, if the Changeling saved a fetter or source of passion from destruction. Reasoning with a Wraith when one is encountered is possible just like any Prodigal, but the Slua tell a tale of a Wraith's chimerical makeup. Just as Fae society splits between Seelie and Unseelie, Wraiths are possessed of rational and insidious portions vying for control. The shadow is the dark half of a Wraith, and it can be difficult to tell when the shadow is taken over. The shadow despises the vitality present in Changelings, and will spitefully orchestrate the downfall of Kithane to whom it takes exception. Shadow-controlled Wraiths will drain the glamour clean from a Changeling. Mm-hmm. It's a decent overview.
Yeah, it's a good perspective of a Changeling who has a high knowledge of what Wraiths are. Let's put it that way. It's not, there's a few things where you're like, is that actually objectively true from a detailed, knowledgeable Wraith? But a Slua who knows a lot about Wraiths and deals with them all the time might agree with all that. So,
and Wraith, like, it was always a low seller. It was always probably the least popular of the main five, maybe because it was too psychologically intense. But a lot of people have commented on it being actually a very hopeful game because it has an actual win condition, in a sense. You resolve your unfinished business. So
I think it's the most intimidating of World of Darkness games for people. Like, I don't know of anyone who went, that game looks bad or badly written or something. It's all like, that looks like a really good game. I don't know if I could do it.
It's bleak for sure.
Yeah. It's and it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe people overthink it's hard. Maybe, I don't know. I'd have to see.
And it was ended early, so it didn't get as much content maybe as well. Although I think it did end up having about as many books as Changeling. So
yeah, well, it was published earlier, a year earlier, I think.
A year earlier,
but it got but that was when Whitewolf was still churning out a ton of supplements, so you got the boost of just lots of books.
Although they did start cramming guilds together to do double guild books.
But I feel like it's more complete than Changeling has ever been in terms of
that's true.
The holes.
But in any case, when it comes to guilds, so the reason we're talking about Guildbook Sandmen, I'm going to read another C20 excerpt here because one of the suggested wraithly antagonists is long dead Sandman. So here's the C20 perspective on them. The greatest threat to changelings from the lands of the dead is also their greatest potential ally. The Sandmen are a guild of ghosts capable of affecting the dreams of entities outside the Shadowlands. Their focus is predominantly mortals, but they also target prodigals, and of course, the Fae. It's one thing to haunt a building, it's quite another to haunt a person's subconscious. The Sandmen possess immunity to attempts to dispel their presence by dint of their distance from targets. A Sandman may sit at the foot of a sleeping Kithane's bed, but by the time the Changeling wakes, addled and lacking energy as a result of the Sandman sapping his dreams, the Wraith is long gone. Changelings fear the Sandman for just this reason. As for why some changelings believe Sandmen are the greatest allies they've never had, the Sandmen can plant the seeds of dreams just as easily as they can scour a mind of all nightmares. Some Slua have stepped forward as representatives of their court to see if the wraiths will take offerings to make an allegiance worthwhile. I think that's a simplistic overview.
Yeah.
Those aspects are in this book, but the Guildbook goes much, much deeper into the possible connections.
Yeah, the first thing is it's called Guildbook Sandman. Not all Sandmen are in the Guild of Sandmen. So what happens, okay, so the guilds are trade guilds that existed and were an important part of Stygian wraith society, which are like the Western European former Roman Empire kind of wraiths, right? And then expanded through colonization to North America and whatnot. So the guilds were like important trade, and each were based around one arcanoi, like, the powers, kind of like arts, but, wraith powers. And what happened was, at one point, there was like around the time of the Shattering, actually, there was a big war, internal fight, and Stygian society, like Charon, who was like the emperor of it for a long time and stuff, outlawed the guilds. And that didn't make the guilds entirely go away, but they can't act openly anymore in the same way. And that kind of fractured things. So what the heck is the name of the arcanoi for Sandman?
Phantasm.
Yeah, Phantasm. So like wraiths skilled in Phantasm, like there is still the guild, and there are definitely a lot of them wraiths with Phantasm in the guild, but then there's also wraiths in the part of the legions, which is like the official structure based on how you died in wraith society, in Stygian society, and those have Phantasm skilled, and then there's the independents who are skilled in Phantasm, and all of them are Sandmen. So
yeah, and I mean, we could get into this. I haven't really done a deep read of Wraith 20, and I don't intend to for this episode. So
yeah,
we're gonna stick with the tidbits.
Yeah, what if skimmed through Wraith 20 didn't? I don't think it really changed a lot there, but I haven't.
No, it makes more sense to dive into the specific Guildbook. So let's go.
Yeah. Okay, so it starts out with a story it's deeply about the Wraith meta plot up to that point. This is published, maybe we should start at the beginning, very beginning.
Yeah, I was going to point out, even before we get to the story, I think it kind of is indicative how closely this will be aligned with Changeling, because the first quote that we get is from Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah, and even before that, the writers, so Richard Dansky's developer, he wrote for several Changeling things. Phil Brucato wrote for a bunch of Changeling things. I think there's other people in here who wrote for Changeling.
Well, yeah.
But this was published in 1995. So this is published, I get the impression this was the people who wrote this had read Changeling. Like Changeling the Dreaming first edition corebook, at least, was kind of solidified.
So I double checked on this. Even though it says 95, apparently it was actually released in March 96.
Okay.
So it was roughly around Immortalized 2 relative to Changeling.
So still very first edition Changeling, but...
And yet, there's still more about Changelings in here than you would expect from other splat books of the era.
Yeah. I just want to say in general, this book does not feel first edition anything. It feels very
developed.
Out. Yeah, developed, yeah.
I have to call out the beauty of this book. So I actually found this in the vintage thrift store near my parents' house some months ago and immediately bought it. A beautiful book. This is how I want black and white books to be done.
Yeah.
There's cool border art. There's evocative drawings that really draw on the strengths of black and white.
Yeah.
The cover has this cool feel and matte texture. The use of space is great. It is a beautifully laid out and designed book.
And that's very common for Wraith books. Changeling, when it went black and white later, was a mix of, they took the color out of the pictures and sketches. But this is, first of all, it's not even, a lot of it's not even grayscale. It's deliberately black and white, some of it.
Yeah.
And it's just all meant to be. You would not want to add color, actually, to most of these pictures. It would make them worse. So
yeah. Shout out also to sole author Beth Fiske, because she did a range of writing in the 90s, but I think Isle of the Mighty is her only Changeling cred. Mm-hmm. But I want to give a shout out because she and her partner, fellow World of Darkness author Alan Varney, co-founded Bundle of Holding. So good on them.
Cool. And there's a whole bunch of special thanks to from
Ian Lemke,
White Wolf people. I think there was a lot of discussions going around things, including how to incorporate Changeling. So,
most def. So I'm going to be looking at this from the perspective of how might they impact the Fae. And
Yeah.
I think the trope of like the dead intruding into dreams is a pretty common one in folklore.
Mm-hmm.
But the cosmology of World of Darkness pretty starkly separates wraiths from changelings, and this is the exception. So I
Yeah.
want to know how they're going to present that
Yeah.
as I open the book.
Okay. So do we want to get to there's an intro story which is
Yeah.
not really that relevant to Changeling and is very based in that point of the Wraith meta plot in the weeds that like
And
I
it's
think if you
also part 2 of the
yeah.
story.
Yeah, if you were to just hand this to someone who has no familiar with Wraith, but they're like a Changeling fan, they'd be like, "What are you talking about here?"
Yeah. Points for mood, though. I mean, I
Yeah.
read it and I went with it. I was like, okay, I understand what's happening here. I don't know that I necessarily know why any of these people or the things they're talking about
Yeah.
are important. But I think one thing it does do well is I think it shows 2 important things. First, the Sandmen are elaborate plotters and liars because they go
Yep.
through this whole like dog and pony show around finding Charon's scythe and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, this is like the last line, is that they would do anything for a good story. And those
Mm-hmm.
2 bits are maybe the most relevant to understanding them as a group and what they would be like in a Changeling game.
Yep.
And all of that this will be reinforced by the theatrical bent of the rest of the book. So.
Yeah. And this has some interesting things dream related in this story that it sort of gets covered later in the book, but I think it highlights it pretty well here is the Sandmen may sometimes go into dreams to collaborate with each other. So
Yeah.
a lot of this would apply to like your oneiromancy. So you might be like in a dream and you're like, why are these weird people standing over here chatting in like someone's normal dream about high school? But it's like they'll meet up in dreams and they'll also get information from dreams. Like there's this whole plot point of knowing what this artifact weapon thing looks like. And it's like, well, you saw it in a dream. And then you're like taking things from dreams and you're altering dreams to hide things. So it's like,
and if I read it correctly, they're also reading the dreams of the object at one point. And I was thinking, gosh, I'd like more about that in Changeling.
I think this object it's in Changeling terms a legendary treasure on the scale of Caliburn or something that's like
it's
kind of conscious. So
it's exactly what's in my notes, the Wraith Caliburn. So
yeah, but it's I think it says here it was like forged from Charon. Charon's a huge epic figure from who like I think he is also supposed to be, yes, he's the ferryman from Greek mythology, but
yeah. And there are hints of what the other guilds are like, but importantly, some rich description of why this guild is a little different. I appreciated that. It's also long. This story is like 10% of the book. Mm-hmm. Hefty fiction. So then we get introduction, Lever de Rideau.
Which I find hilarious because Ottawa, like we have the Rideau River and we have the Rideau Canal, and it's like Rideau's a big name here. I'm like,
Nice. I love the epigraph here where it says, every artist dips his brush into his own soul and paints his own nature into pictures. And I'm like, that's so Changeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the framing of this is you have a Sandman who's really into
costume changes.
Well, Sandman as actor, stage, performing arts kind of thing. And they're like doing like a play explaining what it means to be a Sandman to new Sandman. That's my guess.
I'm going to just read the end of this half-page introduction because it says, Sandmen, then, are those who create and travel between the 2 worlds of reality and illusion, of life and death, never defining either, never allowing either to be defined. We seek tribute, but only an actor's tribute. We desire to be remembered, but only passionately. We are, in short, playwrights of consciousness. We seek remembrance in the stuff of dreams and the fleeting wisps of memory that haunt mortals' minds. Mm-hmm. I'm like, all right, calm down.
Yeah, this book, pretty much my only criticism is like Sandmen can be many different things, and they even talk about that in this book, but they really go on the theater metaphor and aspect hard. I think a bit too hard, but whatever.
To paraphrase a review of the film Mommy Dearest, this book doesn't chew its own scenery. It starts neatly at the corner of each set with a knife and fork and devours it, co-stars and all.
Yeah.
Because then at the end, it's like the narrator pieces out by like blowing sand in your eyes. Sand!
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
But it does also sort of point to the everydayness of Wraith. Like, Wraith as a game, there is horror and there is grand events and there is epicness, but I don't think it's necessarily part and parcel of what your character expects. Like, people have ordinary professions, like actor. They get a ghostly veneer on them, but otherwise it's very similar to life. It's a very ancient Egyptian take on the underworld.
Although it's similar to life, but it's not a good life.
No, because you could still get flesh crafted or soul forged or eaten by specters or whatever.
Not just that, like also like you don't feel the enjoyment, the physical pleasures of things normally. Like you'll go to these like sort of hallucinating shows from Sandmen just to feel something and things like that.
Right. So. And you have to steal emotions in order to survive, in a sense.
Which is other Arcanoid doing that too, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a short introduction. Mm-hmm. And then we're on to chapter 1.
Yeah.
Or Act 1. Sorry. Act 1. Somnus Uncloaked.
Yeah, this is an interesting mythological origin story for the world, which is really feeling very Changeling, because you're reading it going, no, you're not supposed to take this literally, the same way you're not supposed to take that vampires are descended from a red cap named Lilith, like seriously. But also serious in a different way, but not literally. And it I don't know, feels a little bit like when we did Exalted the Fair Folk, like that origin story stuff.
Yeah. The elephant in the room here is that this book came out right when the comic Sandman was ending its run.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of I don't know if they directly drew from that for inspiration, but like the presentation of Morpheus in that comic, it's like he is called the Shaper, and here we have the Sculptor, and he's not Morpheus, he's Somnus, who's almost synonymous in Roman myth. So
yeah, although Somnus here is a bigger figure in this story, like dreamed up life, death, lust, love, and madness, and a host of lesser like that's
the gods of them. I don't know that.
Yeah.
Yes, no. I can believe that this narrator is making the grandiloquent claim that Somnus invented life, but
yeah,
I think that saying that they created a god who governed life is in line with the Sandman comic in a sense.
Yeah, but I think it's not supposed to be a literal story, even though it's
no.
Yeah.
I mean, the takeaway is that without dreams, the gods are nothing. Therefore, dreams are more powerful than gods.
Yeah, it feels a bit Gnostic, where it's like a much lesser god ends up corrupting everything and with stasis and all that stuff.
Have you seen that meme that's like the fake book cover with this sort of fiery devil thing? And it says, "Are you there, God? It's me, a second more powerful god." Anyway, sorry. I'll send it later. Anyway. They also talk about stasis as a force twisting dreams and the death of inspiration, and how the guild's art is a way of understanding the essence of the soul, but not the ability to recreate it.
Yeah.
All of which feels like echoes of Changeling and banality. So it seems like they'd have similar goals at the root.
Yeah, it's like banality and the Weaver from Werewolf, and yeah.
Then the history of the guild follows quickly thereafter, and again, the framing here is interesting. It's the narrator, who is a ghost, presenting the journal of a mortal lucid dreamer who apparently had visions of the guild's history. And I'm thinking, like, why would they need to go through that extra step? But okay.
Well, it comes down to the whole, like, ghosts can in theory last forever, but finding multiple millennia old wraiths is not easy, and they're probably not going to talk to you if you do, and it's probably bad.
Yeah, that's true.
If they do talk to you. So
fair enough. So what are the key points here? They arose from different traditions, although the connection between the Greek word for oracle and thespian, both of which are derived from a root meaning God speech, which I think is pretty cool. They were nomadic. Christianity came. In Europe, they started to focus more on their role in the underworld rather than on the living in the Middle Ages. And then the War of the Guilds, that's the thing you were referring to, right?
Yeah, one thing is like probably around the creation of the dominance of Christianity in the Roman Empire. At some point, Charon and Stygia started enforcing, like creating this rule that you shall not interfere with the living.
The dictum mortuum.
Which is similar to the right of ignorance level, or the masquerade in vampires. Like, yeah, it's considered important, but at the same, and you can get in trouble for... There's a lot of rules in Wraith that are kind of designed for your player character. A lot of reminds me of Nobilis, but we'll get to that in another episode. There's a whole bunch of rules of society that you have to that are there, And you basically can't keep being a wraith, certainly not as a playable character wraith, without breaking a bunch of them. So then the game is the tension of how you hide it or deal with the consequences or whatever of breaking these rules that are needed to keep going. And like everybody knows you've got to break the rules, but you're not allowed to say it. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But it's very deliberate, I think, to make it sort of an oppressive society where it's not like, oh, you break this rule, you're automatically getting soul forged. It's more like everyone's broken the rules, so everyone's in danger.
Right. And the question is how far can you push the envelope in a sense?
And what do you have to do to keep from facing the consequences?
Yeah. I'm not 100% clear on the political divisions, but if I'm reading correctly, there's the hierarchy and there are heretics who are kind of like within the hierarchy, but they're a minority voice. And then there are renegades.
No, there's three. There's the hierarchy, which is Stygia and the legions.
Right.
There's the heretics, which are basically like they have some sort of religious view, and there's a lot of different kinds of heretics. Like there's things called the far shores where they've sort of created these other afterlives and stuff. And this being a heretic is against the rules of Stygia. But
okay. All right.
So there could be hidden.
So that wasn't clear. So
yeah. Being a heretic is one of the rules. And then the renegades are the ones who are more directly opposing Stygia in some way.
Yeah, because it says in here the Renaissance led to a rise in the sort of nonconformist renegade Sandman. But then, like, even once their guild was forbidden in 1598, like they had gained a lot of prestige and power from patrons over the course of the centuries by providing oniric theater to the dead. But then when the guilds were dissolved, they kept their associations going underground. And even though they don't have the wealth and prestige they once did, they are still kind of surviving by performance.
Yeah, and they still have some wealth and some prestige. But
right, because they're one of the... They're not a high guild, but they're a working guild. They're not criminal or forbidden. They're kind of... Although it strikes me as almost like Freemasons or Elks or whatever, like one of those.
But it's still illegal. There's degrees of illegal. So like there's some guild, like there's some arcanoi where using them, like most race will be like, that's wrong, right? And Sandmen are definitely not in that group. But there's also some arcanoi where like everyone goes, yeah, we absolutely need this to continue society. And Sandmen aren't quite in that group either. They're sort of...
Right. They make life bearable, they make death bearable, but not death could abide without them.
Yep.
So anyway, after all that happened, some of the guilds started getting smelted down into objets d'art, because that's what happens to wraiths sometimes when they misbehave. Yep. And they waged the War of the Proscenium, in which they satirized the movers and shakers of the hierarchy through their performances, which led to continuing oppression through the mid-1800s, at which point they founded the Dream Ring Necropolis in upstate New York as a haven. I don't know why that was the place they chose, but it becomes relevant.
I mentioned it to Soren, my husband, and he's like, yeah, that makes sense. It's a lake.
Well, I mean, there's lots of artist colonies and theater troupes and stuff up there, but it's like, all right, sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, they became notorious for violating the code not to interfere with the living. Which I actually think, if you're running a historical Changeling game, I think that would be a good hook, because if you think of 1800s Changelings, Cthulhu in general, not having much access to the dreaming, if any, surely they would notice like a sudden wave of dreams about underworld class struggle intruding on the humans, right?
Yeah. And I think even in the interregnum, it's not like oneiromancy was supposed to be super rare or something, right?
Well, see, that depends if you want to retcon second edition or not.
Well, we'll get to the actually listener questions later, but the role of oneiromancy, it's because Phantasm and oneiromancy has a lot of overlap. Not entirely
for
the
sure.
same, but
so the end result of all of that was this bifurcation between the approved state-sanctioned performances versus the underground and subversive stuff, not unlike in the living world. During the World Wars, at least, they all banded together to fend off the evil atrocity war dreams created by the specters.
Yep. Some of them were technically Sandmen, I guess, because they had same arcanoi.
Yeah. Just used for nefarious purposes. And then more contemporarily, the 60s, the United States saw psychedelic spectacles created for the counterculture mortals. Others just liked messing with them. many joined heretical and sensualist cults. Another plot hook that occurred to me as I was reading through this is this idea of the dream infant, which they don't get into detail very much, but the idea of a child conceived within a dream and like what happens to that child. Again, hints of the Sandman comic.
Mm-hmm.
So there are fewer Sandmen working within the hierarchy than without. Phantasm encourages a more mystical worldview of the self, and transcendence is equated with dreaming, which doesn't really fit into the hierarchy's way of being, I would say.
Yeah, but it also has more practical uses. The hierarchy is part of why I don't think ghosts make sense as Fey realm, but like the hierarchy is incredibly banal.
Yeah.
Those ghosts have very high banality ratings, so.
But this is also, I find this gothic punk at its finest. You know, you find yourself trapped within this stultifying hierarchy of the dead. You subvert through art.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there you go. There's a few notes about Sandman outside of Stygia. There's a lot of them in India called Gandharvas. There are some in Australia where their powers are considered sacred. Some in China where they manipulate the dreams of mortals and wraiths alike to support the emperor's rule or to hide their own subversive activity. And in Africa, they trade secrets and deal with ghosts of animals hunted to extinction, which I thought was really interesting and a good werewolf crossover.
Yeah. And this is the thing. I think by this point, I can't remember which book it was in. I've read it, but I can't remember which book it is. I think it already published basically covering much of the places that the C20 Player's Guide covered. And
Yay.
Just from my having never been to any of these places perspective, did a better job. So
fancy that.
Not saying it was perfect. I imagine it's still a White Wolf book from the 90s, but I think it did a much better job from what I can tell.
Well, if someone ever does a Wraith podcast, they can talk about it.
Yes.
So overall, I don't know, like I found the trope of the diarist a little weird, but it's a fairly dense history that I don't think it wastes much space, all things considered.
No. Yeah, I think for what the book's point is, for a Changeling crossover perspective, it's not getting into the details, but that's not what the point of the book is. So,
yeah. To the point about the other kingdoms or the other dark kingdoms and their separate underworlds around the world, it is helpful to remember that because Wraith is so Stygia focused, I would say the traditions worldwide that associate death with dreams, those have unique social and cultural repercussions within the context of the game. And I would question, like, okay, so will the Dark Kingdom of Jade have such a strong association between Phantasm, theatrical tradition, and counterculture? It might, but the justifications would likely differ.
Now, this is all supposed to be the way colonization works in Wraith. It's similar to human real-world colonization, but an important part of it is the people. If most people who have been dying for hundreds of years there just are part of that culture, like in Canada or the US, most of the populations from Europe, which means they were under Stygian control, right? Which means the wraiths are all mostly part of that culture, which means it's under control of Stygia, right? Same as Australia, versus like parts of Africa or South America or something where it's like, definitely there was colonization, but it was a minority running things, not importing vast numbers of people from Europe. So it never was quite the same level of control from the death perspective. But.
Yeah. Shall we carry on to chapter Act 2? Somnus's People. Wherein we find out about the different types of Sandman, their politics, their opinions. And we get this creepy ass picture to open. I hate this picture.
It feels distorted or something. Like they meant it for a different aspect ratio and got twisted or something. Maybe. I can't tell.
So there's this opening about appearance and mannerisms, which has information about gossamer. This is clothing that Sandman assemble from passing through mortal dreams. It often reflects scenes from those dreams. And I love this. Like,
in Changeling terms, they're picking up, sometimes incidental, I think often incidental. They're basically grabbing chimera from mortal dreams and just wearing them. I love it.
But for conceptualizing voile, this is so useful, I think.
Yep. Yeah, but instead of them forming it, they like, oh, I like that necklace that somebody's wearing in this dream. I'm going to take it.
Yoink.
I love it.
And the mannerisms, this is what comes from decades or centuries of being an actor or a director, like just very dramatic about everything. So
And plus, this is like the framing thing is they are doing a
Right.
stage play or a pageant. I guess it might be counting as. We'll
Imagine how boring this would be to actually sit through.
What? It's not just somebody sitting and talking. They're doing like
guess.
full on like Dreamcraft level. Like Phantasm does more than just stepping into dreams, or you also can like create hallucinate. Like it's doing Dreamcraft stuff and Tailcraft and all that together. So
Listen, I have always been very content to be a book learner. I don't need engaging lectures.
yeah, but at least it's like a 3D full sense multimedia presentation and not just
save your holodecks.
yeah.
Anyway, the politics of the guild is that they're basically split into two camps. There's the Dream Union, who belongs to the now forbidden and supposedly defunct Sandmen's Guild, and the Freelancers, who just have Phantasm.
Mhm.
Both groups do consider themselves Sandmen because you're defined by your Arcanos, but you don't have to engage with the guild as a structure.
Yeah, and I think there's more of a shared identity here than maybe you get in some of the other Arcana. Yeah, like the one that just lets you sort of outrage, just lets you throw things around. I don't feel like that would have the same cultural identity part.
Possibly not. So it seems like freelancers are generally more willing to work with the hierarchy because they don't have the guild association that is technically illegal. Because there are elements within the hierarchy that do look for and punish ghosts in the guild. So
although even then, like there's the touring and giving dreams into other wraiths perspective, which is legal.
Yeah, but not mortals.
Of Sandmen, yeah, mortals would be technically illegal, so you want to be careful. Although proving that you did that's difficult, but you wouldn't want to say it.
Yeah, there's this note though where it's saying that like, oh well, why would you join the Dream Union because it's risky, and oh they stick with it because of the collaborations and the creative freedom, and at one point the classes, they're like, oh, there are classes. And it just, to me, it's a little weird to be like, I'm dead, and my association with this guild makes me suspect in the eyes of the hierarchy, and they might forge me into, like, I don't know, a decorative lamp. Yeah. But thank Charon, I've got my playwriting workshop for the rest of eternity.
But keep in mind, too, like, you need things to continue existence.
I know.
Yeah, the grind.
But free playwriting classes, is that enough?
Not just playwriting. We'll dig into this later. It's how you learn Phantasm.
It does also seem like it's also just regular playwriting too, though.
Sure. Yes.
Regardless, yes, they put on these performances for other wraiths.
But when you're doing those performances for other wraiths, I imagine there's a lot of different kinds of ability rolls. So you probably learn some things that would be helpful there too, beyond just
And regarding the mortal stuff, the lists of reasons that they give are actually quite interesting because sometimes it's altruistic. Some of them have savior complexes about helping mortals through their dreams. But then there's also this mention of the mortal oneironauts volunteering for sleep studies, and the Sandmen really like to mess with them. Mm-hmm. And that feels like an Orpheus connection.
Yeah. And some of these also work for oneiromancy. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about what would have changed with maybe not the dream researcher bit, but some of the other stuff.
It might also be worth pointing out. So this is a change that was made from original Wraith to Wraith 20. The root ability of Phantasm, like the level 1 dot, it slips a mortal out of their dream into the Shadowlands in order to facilitate interaction with them.
Yep.
In Wraith 20, though, this has been replaced with just determining what stage of sleep they're in, because mortals need to be in REM sleep so they can do Phantasm.
I'll dig into this. Remember, this is a thing that I wish was in Changeling, and maybe we'll work on that later. But you can have different level 1s and different level 2s.
Yes, no, that's true. But the common level 1 non-guild affiliated art was just to slip mortals out of their dream. So the change that suggests to me, though, like metaphysically, is that in the 20th anniversary, it's more on the side of wraiths entering dreams rather than bringing mortals into the Shadowlands, which I think actually provides more opportunity for crossover with Changeling and raises a lot of questions about how the land of the dead abuts the dreaming.
So they also do have wraiths entering dreams in here too. That's still an ability you could do.
They can.
Although they don't physically do it. Like they slumber in the Shadowlands while their like mind goes off. So it's a little bit different.
But they no longer have the ability to easily slip out a sleeping mortal's soul that they used to.
No.
So I like the idea though of like a sleeping mortal being a bridge from the dreaming to the underworld. Like that's one way you can walk from one to the other. So
there's also an interesting website in here, which is down, but I grabbed it on the
I love
Wayback
it.
Machine.
No,
And it's
absolutely.
all very old school. Like, do you even put the freaking port 80 in it? But it's like, I'm just going to read it out just for people, some of our
Yes.
younger listeners, or www.iag.net:80, so that's the port 80, / hutch HUTCHIB /.dream /input.html. I love that URL. That's so 1995 or 6 or whatever.
Link will be in the show notes.
Yeah, it's down, but you can find it on the Internet Archive.
And the guy who ran it is still around. Like, I
Oh.
found his webpage. He's like a psychology researcher at some university. But I mention all of that sort of distinction because there's a lot of discussion through this chapter about pulling sleeping mortals into spectacles, and that's the context for it. So generally speaking, the Sandmen occupy themselves with haunting theaters, traveling through mortal dreams where they stage their spectacles, inspiring mortals where they can. There's a random paragraph from an issue of Time magazine. I don't know if that's actually a thing that was real, but the Study of Dreams conference.
Wait, where's this? Where are we at? Do we pass?
I think it's on the same page as the Dream Database URL.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Dream Conference.
Yeah.
This seems like a perfect thing for Changelings to go to, too. Like, this actual... like, that conference, and there was, like, magazine issues and stuff. It's like, okay, there's got to be some Changelings that went to this, too. It's great.
Yeah. To the point about using mortal dreamscapes as the stage and the raw materials for their pageants, I mean, essentially, some groups of Sandmen are just theater troupes. Like, they have other guilds that come in and help with their sort of stagecraft skills and open up a range of story possibilities. But the main sort of art form are the dream scripts, constructing a story around a mortal dreamer as they are the protagonist, whether it's a pleasant dream or a nightmare. It gets a little meta, like you're role-playing a ghost who's role-playing inside a mortal's dream.
Well, it seems like the perfect, what is it, circle is the term for a group of wraiths?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it'd make a good circle concept, like wire all the PCs together, is you all have different arcanoi and you're based around doing these pageants, but you could even do some crossover with other games too.
Yeah.
So
speaking of which,
yeah, so we talk about the other stuff. So mages,
not much.
Werewolf, there's some stuff,
not
and
much.
Then vampire, they're like, don't do it.
Weirdly, nothing about the Giovanni. I guess it was too early.
But also, if you're talking about the Giovanni, like, why would the Sandmen in particular care about stay even more away from them? Yeah.
Yeah, well, not in particular, but I feel like every Wraith book should say, these dudes, stay the hell away from those.
Yeah. Yep.
The Changeling connection, though.
Yeah, this is a lot more information than the other ones.
To quote the book, what do Sandmen not have in common with them?
So we have, what are some highlights here?
They both seem to be drawn to dreamers.
Yep. Changelings are actually more vulnerable, in a sense, to Phantasm, going into dreams.
Yeah. And all of this was before Guildbook Slua, so there were no ghost sight mechanics at this point.
Yeah.
Even though it had been suggested within the text.
And there was no oneiromancy either. But
yeah.
Yeah. But they were very interested in both, and there's more about this later in the book, but they're like interested both in changelings and dreamers. So
there's this sidebar about sand as the essential artifact of the guild, with changelings being a rich source of its creation.
Yep.
Almost like dross with a resonance from the dream that it was gathered in. Gathered like glamour. Especially
in C20 terms, dross. It's absolutely dross. And they use it. And it makes their Phantasm arcana easier to use.
Yeah. And ultimately both groups are quite wary of each other, despite the fact that they could actually be valuable allies for each other.
Yep.
So there's a really good note in here that I like about the Sandmen considering changelings immature. Because to be fair, a lot of them who have been dead for decades are older than most changelings, despite the reincarnation thing. So in my headcanon, when it comes to C20 oneiromancy, the way that I think of it is during the interregnum, the Cathane who were still on Earth lost a lot of their knowledge. They were cut off from a lot of the glamour and the dreaming and everything. The resurgence, the She brought stuff back and it reawakened a lot. And over the course of the intervening decades, they have relearned how to do some of these arts, like oneiromancy. They've relearned naming and Chronos when formerly the She were the only ones who remembered them. So that arc here in 1996 Splatbook, the Sandmen are like, oh, those changelings don't know how to do anything. 30 years on, it's like, well, we figured out oneiromancy again, so now we're on more equal footing.
I can imagine there would be some changelings with oneiromancy, but not enough to make the Sandmen.
Well, plenty of Darkkin.
Yeah. Well, no, but even other change, like there are probably some Cathane who knew it, but like possibly. It has to be enough. Like wraiths, we didn't get to all the powers of wraiths. They have like all sorts of powers. They can just look at someone, and at least if they're like trying to, they can tell who's a changeling if they know what to look for. So like they can find changelings quite easily. But if only like 1 in 1,000 changelings has oneiromancy, they're not gonna.
That's true. So yeah, there's opportunities for sure. Yeah. And then there's a section called the Actors' Roles, which lays out the subdivisions of the guild, of which there are umpteen.
Yeah, and most of these are not actually based on being an actor, which I've actually kind of liked, and I wish it makes me wish the phrasing was the whole structure wasn't as heavily based around being an actor.
Right. I've got one-liners as usual for these. If you want to throw names at me, I'll just...
And some of these are things that oneiromancy could also be. Some of these could be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Too, but ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So dream menders.
So these are ones who use newly discovered applications of Phantasm to manipulate mortals' growth hormones and thereby heal their bodies while they sleep, which is a popular new activity.
Dream lords.
These are powerful and ancient Sandmen who can use their dreams to teleport, and they've got crazy illusion powers and such.
The Paphians.
AKA the Dream Whores. They sell fantasies to paying customers as basically licensed sex work wraiths.
Mm-hmm. Fortifiers.
Also known as psychoneerists. They use Phantasm to strengthen against their shadows and strengthen others against their own shadows.
Night riders.
Young Sandmen who like to surf from one mortal's dreams to another's in rapid succession, which is called brain surfing, or slip a mortal's dreaming soul in and out of their body as rapidly as possible, called soul slipping, or just go all out on nightmare crafting, called horror rising for shiggles. All of which I think are great story hooks and one-shot ideas or crossover possibilities. Lots of unseelie activity.
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, all these uses of Phantasm, I feel like it'd be cool to make it allowed for at least unleashing oneiromancy, and maybe if you did alternate cantrips. Some of these could be, anyway.
I would say as long as it doesn't, like, directly step on the toes of another art. Like, the healing stuff,
maybe that one's not. But a lot of the other stuff should be.
Yeah. Well, or like, so then there's the plotters who use their expertise in story crafting, and I'm like, is that stepping on the toes of tailcraft? But then again, they don't really use Phantasm for it, so.
Night terrors, night angels.
These Sandmen give intense nightmares or inspiring dreams, respectively, to mortals, and then appear to them right as they wake up. Although I kind of like the idea of them doing that, and the mortal who's so inspired or so terrorized by the dream, like, wakes up and sees this apparition. From a changeling perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if that created a chimera, and then what if the wraith somehow gets stuck inside that chimera?
Yeah. And the story around the night angels just really creepy.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll skip that.
Yeah. Wraith does not shy away from that stuff. No. Plotters, you already mentioned.
Yeah, they're Machiavellian.
Yeah.
Who isn't these days?
Yeah, there's also a sidebar on dream states, which just it's like fun sleep facts. Like that's something.
I mean, useful. I found it interesting for sure.
Yeah.
The one on the next page with dream trivia is even better though. But we'll get to that.
Yeah. Playwrights.
Also known as dramaturgists. Har har. They just write plays, whether for art or for commission. That's their thing.
Specialists? Is that really a...
Yeah, specialists, which is further subdivided.
Yeah. Oneric pacers.
They organize dreams to fit the mortal dreaming them.
Symbolists.
They study symbolism in dreams. And they wear berets because they have to.
Wordsmiths.
They specialize in puns and wordplay. And I'm thinking, is this really an entire group that's getting multiple paragraphs?
I just think this would be hilarious if they also did that, specializing in doing things in mortal dreams and just making all the dreams very punny and weird jokes.
Do you know what? I have had dreams like that. I will
Yeah.
admit to it, but yeah.
And then there's like state artisans.
Yes, they work to induce the specific dream states laid out
Yeah.
in that sidebar.
Yep. And there's more dream trivia sidebar. Spirit guides.
They lead vision quests in culturally appropriate settings.
Mm-hmm. Succubi and incubi.
Experts in seduction, but not demons, not actual succubi and incubi. Just
Mm-hmm. But they specialize in that on other wraiths, because it's
right.
like normally as a wraith you don't feel those kind of things anymore. So
You do when you get succubized.
Yep. And then they talk about wandering troops, which are like, I'm
Exactly
wondering how it works. It's like they go around in like covered wagons, and I'm like, where do you get those covered wagons? And they're just getting
They're
objects,
soul forged,
or the relics, I guess.
This was Benedetto. Now he's our covered wagon.
Yeah. Well, there's the whole thing too of like somebody's prized Winnebago, and you're just
right. The relic Winnebago.
Yep. And then we have the pariahs.
Yes.
These are socially unacceptable uses. So you have collectors who did the whole like stealing the soul, but they just keep it.
Yep.
And then Dopplers.
They instill madness by switching dreaming souls, which, again, great story hook.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a favorite piece of dream trivia from the sidebar? I liked the platypus one.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say too.
Platypus, like, there just needs to be a whole splatbook platypus. They just keep discovering awesome things about them.
Yeah, I mean, Werewolf really dropped the ball on that one, I think.
Yep. Egg-laying, non-dreaming, venomous, biofluorescent, amphibious mammal. Like, everything.
With weird chromosomes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So overall, really good ideas about oneiromantic technique and particulars that could be ported into C20 if you wanted to make your game about dreamcrafting fae. Yeah. And even if you don't, I feel like the level of detail provided here is like subtle and specific enough that you could build scenes and clues around these dreams from the changeling's perspective. Like they enter a mortal dream, they catch these little clues and begin to uncover some kind of wraith circle that might be up to no good.
Yeah.
Or up to good. Maybe they're helping the dreamers.
Or even they find out like your dreamers having strange things happen, or you've been having strange things happen. Like even without an oneiromancy, you could have things finding out there's a Sandman messing with things.
Yeah. And some of the mechanics might need more hashing out. Like we get mechanics in the next chapter on how wraiths gather sand, but it's unclear how a changeling would be affected by that.
We'll get into that. I think there's
We'll get into that. I do also just have this lingering question of why are the Restless Dead spending their energy putting on musicals, but you can work with that. It's definitely more detailed of a society chapter than in many pre-revised splat books, and I appreciate that.
Remember, most of the underworld's in black and white, just like the books, and in the dreams, things are in color. So that
yeah, that's true, yeah. It's like Pleasantville.
Yeah.
Only not very Pleasantville.
Unpleasantville.
Yeah. There's also this whole the existential crisis of being associated with your occupation forever.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Brings us to Act 3, Systems.
Yes. A fairly brief chapter of crunch, but it's solid crunch.
Yeah.
Phantasm powers.
Yeah. So I think of this as... I feel like one use of this book is... Like, I'm planning on... I was already thinking of having a Sandman NPC. So this would be this is going to be very helpful for that. A lot more giving me a lot more ideas on how, and you could even have multiple Sandmen NPCs. And
a whole troop.
Yep.
Before we get into it, I think it's good to point out what the base abilities are from the corebook.
Which corebook?
From 1st, 2nd edition Wraith corebook.
Yep.
So you had the basic ability of Sleep Sense, which allowed you to determine where in the sleep cycle a mortal's at. And then the progression was level 1 is Elysia, which pulls a sleeper's soul loose and you can carry it around with you. Level 2 is Lucidity, which allows you to alter details of a mortal's dream. Level 3, Dreams of Sleep, causes wraiths to fall into slumber. Level 4, Phantasmagoria, allows you to create illusions. It's unclear whether they have a chimerical aspect or not, but that's level 4.
I would go with yes, the way...
Yeah, probably.
Kind of like with, what's the Ravnos one?
Chemistry. Yeah. And then level 5 is Aegon, which is similar to Elysia, but more directly rips a mortal soul from their sleeping body, which also does health levels of damage. And then in Wraith 20, the 1st level power Elysia is replaced by the Sleep Sense basic ability.
Yeah. So this has multiple alternate ones. And I think some of these could have, well, the first one's cognizance, which lets a wraith defend themselves or someone else from dream manipulation, which I do think should count for oneiromancy, because you could find that it's for, you're trying to use oneiromancy, you're like, what's stopping me? What's going on here? Another level 1 is conclave, which is where they go meeting in a dreamscape somewhere. So like this could be an interesting place, either in the dreaming or someone's. I think of this more like they're just some random place in the dreaming they're meeting. And you're like, wait a second.
Well, I see. That's the thing is, I'm curious how this works out cosmologically, because
Yeah.
I like the idea of the Sandmen getting together and saying, okay, we're going to meet in this random mortal's dream. And they go and they meet.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, a changeling happens to pop in from the dreaming. And the Sandmen are like, wait, who are you? And what's that back door you just came in through? And that's how they figure out how to enter the dreaming. But then they're not protected in the dreaming.
From reading the intro story in this, I'm not actually sure this is in someone's actual sleeping person's dream. I think this could be somewhere else in the far dreaming or something, or the near dreaming.
Unclear.
Yeah, but that's whatever it is. That's an interesting thing to play with.
Yeah.
Another level 1 is lingua. This lets them communicate with dream imagery if you don't know the language to actually talk to someone, or you want to hide it in a certain way. And then we have a new level 2, inspire. This one has a lot of changeling implications. Like I think this is musing. The wraith is musing someone.
Yeah.
Level 3, mending. That's the one. Yeah, I think maybe oneiromancy shouldn't do that, but it could heal somebody through a dream. Okay, maybe this feels weird actually.
It's very like sci-fi-ish, like we've learned to stimulate the growth hormones in the brain to heal you while you sleep.
And I don't think it's like over the top in terms, like it doesn't heal other wraiths, it only heals mortals and stuff, but like it's kind of weird. Maybe you could bring it in.
It sounds like the kind of thing that there was a fringe science theory that it might work back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like I could imagine this being a book in the self-help section.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we're talking about ghost magic powers, so I mean, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then a new level 4, incubus, which is a form of maybe not ravaging, or like it feels almost like Thaline kind of, but it strips glamour from somebody.
I'd call it ravage, or it's like reaping.
It might be more intense than ravaging. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, is it reaping where you scare someone to death?
Yeah, you're not scaring them to death, but you're definitely scaring them.
Well, no. We don't have to scare them to death.
But it's like a dream ravage kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it should definitely, in terms of if it's done on a dreamer, you could tell even from the reading, it's like, oh, somebody was actually trying to make this work with Changeling. Like Inspire and Incubus do look like they're trying to fit mechanically with musing and ravaging.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's oneirotaxia.
Oneirotaxia. I love all words that begin with oneiro.
This makes someone unable to dream, which just reminds me of that Star Trek Next Generation episode.
Right?
Like somebody saw that and then it just...
I guess, it would have come out,
It would come out before this.
A few years before this,
Yeah, so that's another alternate level 5 power. Another alternate level 5 power is supplicant, where they switch the souls around. This was confusing me, because this takes another arcanoid to...
Well, it does, but it's the 1st and 5th level of Phantasm.
Okay, yeah. But anyway, it's like swapping it around. That's a lot of investment to just be a real dick.
But listen, if you've got nothing better to do, and you're dead...
So that's the arcanoid. Do you have any thoughts on that, or a favorite use or something?
I mean, favorite... I do really like the oneirotaxia kind of as a converse to Inspire and Incubus. Like in a Changeling story, it's like, wait, suddenly all of these dreamers are unable to dream. What is going on? I think that would be an interesting hook.
Oh, so you would have it as unable to produce glamour too. Okay.
Right. And one of the things about Wraith is because the shadow can occasionally seize control, and through some of these powers, they generate what's called angst. And that's like power points that only your shadow can use. So essentially, by using some of these, you're giving your shadow more power when they eventually take over to mess up your on life.
Yeah, and these 2 level 5, the last 2 powers are just...
They're rough.
They're only there to give your shadow strength.
Right. And that's the morality system in a sense. Like rather than have a humanity track, that's how Wraith manages morality. It's like, you can do this, but eventually something is going to seize control of your corpus and do really horrific things.
Although technically you actually could have a shadow that's more moral than a psyche, but it's not
true.
the most common thing. And then we have these artifacts of dream, and I find this pretty interesting too from a changeling perspective. The first one is we actually get the stats for sand.
It's not nearly as powerful as I expected.
No, but it's common, and it also would count as ravaging. Okay, changelings harvested require 1 temporary point of banality in addition to the psychological effects. I don't know if C20 if you'd make that like an opposed. Maybe you'd make C20 make it like an opposed banality check or something. I don't know, but
I might just still give them the point of banality
yeah,
and let them figure out how that happened.
now I just want to mention this was before the rolling for banality thing. But sand it's still pretty valuable. Like if you have enough of it, if you have enough sand handy, you could be rolling everything at minimum difficulty. Is pretty crazy.
It just seems to take a lot of work to gather because it says you can only get
Yeah.
1 point from a given dreamer per story. So you have to go to a lot of dreams to gather.
Yeah.
I imagine there are Sandmen that make this their entire career.
But you could also get multiple. They can walk into like any house basically. Suppose there's 4 people dreaming there. You could get it from all 4 of them that night quite easily and move on to another house.
Yeah, but how long does it take? They all have to. You have to wait for them to all dream in succession.
Yeah, but I think you could still do several people a night quite easily, and then you sell it to other Sandman.
But you gotta get back to your playwriting.
That's true. Yeah,
rehearsal.
Well, that's where you like, and then you like sell it to other Sandman for all. Anyway, they get into that. Yeah. And then another one I like. It's called the Dream Spider, and it basically also feeds on glamour, and they just basically causes writer's block. Like I think it just makes somebody incapable producing glamour.
Yeah,
the dream spot, and then like that could be a thing that you like. You need to use something like oneiromancy to like go into it and then fight the dream spider or something to pull it out. Like I like that. The other ones I didn't. Just like it's kind of interesting. You have this mirror of memory and a dream catcher and those two. I'm like, yeah. Do you think a dream catcher would work on Chimera?
I think a dream catcher already exists as a treasure somewhere in Changeling. So
so this would be like one made by wraiths.
Yeah,
so you wouldn't physically see it. Like changelings who aren't Sluo wouldn't necessarily be able to see one.
Yeah. I do think that each of these provides all of this provides story hooks. Each of those individual powers and each of those artifacts.
Yeah.
You can build a session around it.
Yeah. But especially the Sand and Dream Spider, I think, is very straightforward changeling crossover idea.
Yeah. And I think setting it up like that, like you said, having a dream spider just lurking, waiting to be discovered and fought, that allows you to introduce the guild slowly and subtly. Like their influence may be deep and pervasive before changelings even realize it.
Yeah. The first thing you do is you're like dealing with a dream spider, like, oh, like in your prized dreamer, and you're like, what is happening here?
Yeah. And motivation wise, it's helpful to remember that the wraiths need emotional energy to survive and to engage with like the underworld commerce, but they're plausibly just as passionate or sadistic or curious or whatever as any character. So like you have the reason why they're there in the first place and how they present to the changelings who encounter them.
Yep.
And the crunch that we get in this chapter explains the how of those story possibilities.
Yep. And another thing is like the fetter aspect. You mentioned fetters being like places and things, but it can also very much be people. And having a wraith's fetter also be something or someone important to a changeling, if you want to do crossover, that's like the most obvious, I think, way to, especially at least if the wraith is using powers that changeling could notice. So.
Yeah. And then we get Act 4.
So this is, I don't think it's worse than the typical ones we get in changeling. It's definitely not better. Yeah.
Yeah.
All play things, like theater stuff.
Yeah, they all are, aren't they?
Yeah. And it's just more of these concepts that are, like you said, they're probably made for being, I don't check the stats if they match up. I don't care.
I don't know the character creation well enough to know if they're balanced, frankly. Yeah,
but like, I always thought of these as like throwaway NPCs, but they're not great for that either normally.
No.
You really need like a drama critic ghost in your game.
So the shirt on that one that has like the artifact of computer.
Yeah.
So we have the troubled genius, who is an alcoholic, artsier than thou playwright, trying to write masterpieces.
That's really hard being an alcoholic as a ghost, I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think he's technically in recovery.
Yeah.
There's the scheming ingenue, an actress who never made it, but intends to do so after she died ignominiously. The drama critic has a relic printing press and laptop, and that shirt for some reason.
Wait, is the shirt a relic?
I think it must be. Just look at it. It's not listed, but I'm choosing to believe that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's his gossamer. He got it from a dream of graph paper.
Yeah.
There's the film queen, who's a silent film star whose career was cut short, and she's desperate to maintain her stardom. And the impresario, who had kind of a boring life and became a Sandman almost by accident, but is now committed to acting. I think he's probably the most interesting of the bunch, which is like saying this piece of bread is more interesting than the other pieces of bread.
Hey, there's some interesting bread out there, but yes,
not this loaf.
He's not quality bakery still.
No.
He's like, oh, that was the bakery at your grocery store level.
He's like $3.99, buy two for $1.99 each at the supermarket.
Yeah, but he's like a baguette instead of a loaf of sliced bread.
The shadows stuff is actually the most intriguing part of these. Yeah. Like the impresarios likes to orchestrate disasters just because he's hateful. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
So I think were I to make a Sandman character, because I'm not making a Sandman for the game I'm going to be playing in, I would do something like an apocalyptic street preacher who brings their visions to life as morality plays, or someone who runs something like almost like an opium den for Wraith dreamers, like you see in Inception.
I do think, having never played or run Wraith, but I do feel like Session Zero is more important, I think, in Wraith Chronicles than like Changeling Chronicles even, because like it's like, oh, you do this den thing, and it's like the player character concepts have to work together.
And there's also some of these which, well, not some of these example ones, but like when you look at the specialists or the subdivisions of the guild, so something like the Night Riders, I think they're really rich for story possibilities, but playing one would be like, let me give you all the content warnings. And some of the powers kind of reflect that, because another idea that I had looking through this was, what about a mercenary soul swapper who hires out their services for like hierarchy torture outfits?
Yep.
Really interesting and complex character, not necessarily something that I would want to play.
Yeah, and Wraith in general, you're talking about the content warnings and the safety. Like, oh my goodness. Like, this game existed before its time because like safety tools weren't a thing, and boy does it need them. I'm thinking of the Wraith Black Dog supplement, which from my understanding is very tasteful, but
yeah. But I would guess that somewhere within the Wraith line they do have a safety tools section somewhere. They certainly do now.
I think the Wraith 20 does, but
yeah,
I don't think they did when this book came out.
Maybe not. Lastly, and not leastly, only because the last chapter was even worse, we have the big players, which is just 3 notable Sandmen.
Mm-hmm.
There's Hikaru Matsuki, who is an avant-garde theater director genius who's carried his talent across the shroud. He produces pageants throughout the Shadowlands, some with political consequences. There's Dixan Shenili, who claims to possess the reincarnated soul of Thespis, ancient Greek poet and father of drama. Regardless of whether that's true, she's an expert oniric pacer and valued mentor. Maybe could teach Changeling oneiromancers a thing or two. And then Anton de Varzonzuela, an outsider among the guild and a master dreamcrafter, who is a darling of the Dream Lords but fell from grace. Now he travels incognito, dogged by his fate.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just 3 variations on the same theme.
Like, I think Anton looks slightly more interesting, but these are both like very powerful NPCs that also don't really contribute much to your game, so I'm not really...
No. They're just kind of like, here are the celebrity actors and playwrights that you can aspire to be like.
They had some in the other story, in the other fiction, they had some other Sandmen. Maybe they should have like had them here. That'd be good.
Yeah. Well, missed opportunity. And then a character sheet.
Which is, I think, just the Wraith character sheet, but says Sandman on it.
No, it does have on page 3 of 4, there's a Dreamscape section and a favored stages section.
Ah, okay.
So, and the back cover blurb mentions a Wraith from Philadelphia. So I'm like, yeah, represent.
So overall thoughts?
So I would say, although I don't have much point of reference for the game, it's pretty good as a splatbook. The opening story is quite rich, if long. The history chapter is quite detailed, if oddly framed, the diary thing. And the society culture chapter is thorough, although a little uneven. I think what I would have wanted to see more about is status within the guild, more about relations with other guilds, because there's actually none of that. And I don't know if stereotypes weren't a wraith thing when it came to like guilds commenting on other guilds, but I was curious. And then just more about the mechanics of actually pulling dreamers into pageants. So there might be more about that in the core book. The crunch was crunchy, if you like Arcanoi, the templates and famous faces. Meh. And the theme overall, like, yes, it is all about theater and drama, so it's very narrow. But within that narrow bound, it does go quite deep. And I liked that. So
yeah, I think it's a pretty good splat book as far as like, comparing against the Kith books. It would definitely be, I'd rate it not better than all of them, but better than the average probably. And if you were to buy a Wraith splat book for running a Changeling game, this is the one to buy for sure.
I'll also say, I think this is the first Wraith book I bought. Like, I've been on a Wraith book buying spree for the past year or so, and I think this was the start of it. So.
Yeah, I specifically just bought the PDF to do our show.
Oh, yeah, no, I had the PDF already, but...
Now that we don't have... The big advantage of us doing originally was I backed C20 at the level where I got all the Changeling books on PDF. Hey. But we've done those now. So, but yeah, this is no. I think I'll use this in my next Changeling game probably. This is combined with the Wraith 20 core book. I think I could throw together.
Yeah, because there's a lot of story hooks in these pages, especially chapter 2. Because I think chapter 2. That was the highlight for me, because that's where it most broke away from the they're all theater people idea. And I love theater people. I was a theater person.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd want to play a character who's a theater person for eternity. Like, that's their whole thing.
Yeah.
So, and the presentation of oneiromancy here, apart from the difference in mechanics, there's a different perspective on it. So it adds a nice contrast to what you get in C20, and you could build a story around that.
Yeah, I find chapters 2 and 3 are super important for me. Like, that's the part.
Well, yeah, 3 is important mechanically for sure.
It's like 3 gives the mechanics for 2, basically. My thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we want to do lister questions?
Yeah. So first of all, Jig asked, does anyone else think it was weird that this Wraith group got rules and systems for entering individual people's dreams and Changeling the Dreaming did not? Pre-C20.
Yeah. Well, no, there was an oneiromancy before C20, wasn't there?
There was Darkkin oneiromancy.
Yeah.
But not Kithane.
Yeah. I feel like we should have had rules for that in the first ed core book for Changeling, and it seems a little bit weird we didn't. But
yeah,
like maybe you could have fewer pictures of Julian Bashir. And
don't knock my Alexander Siddiq.
Okay, I like that one. But there's other pictures around that they could have pages.
That's fair.
They could have cut.
So yeah, it is weird. I agree. But honestly, though, getting that question before I read the book, when I actually went into reading it, I expected more rules and systems, like more development of those. Like, I expected chapter 3 to have an actual oneiromancy system, akin to what you get in Changeling the Lost. And it really didn't. Like, it just had variations of Phantasm.
Yeah, but I do think Phantasm probably has, like, if you take Phantasm core book plus this,
you
that's
true.
It's not like they introduced Phantasm in this book.
And from the side of, is it weird that Changeling didn't have this? I would say Changeling's role, as it was initially conceived, was more about dealing with the repercussions on mortals when they wake up. And this book doesn't really deal so much with that.
Yeah, it's a different kind of meaning of the word dream.
Yeah. It's the other side.
Yeah. Although I would like more tie-in. And now that we have oneiromancy and C20 and stuff, I still feel like there's a lot of questions I'm left with. Like, how does oneiromancy fit into the wider metaphysic of the dreaming is still very open.
Well, I would play that up. I would say, I would make it, like I said, with my headcanon, have the Changelings still figuring that out. And that allows you to both build it out, but also play into the mystery of it.
But as a storyteller, I'd kind of like to have some ideas before I do
that. I don't know. Let your players help decide.
Yeah. And then Van Eck talks about how do you think Changelings would react to Sandmen's theology, let's call it? Would some actually agree? I mean, like I said, this felt very Changeling, the story. So I feel like Sandmen and some Changeling, any Kith, doesn't really matter, or multiple ones were to have this conversation, the Changeling would be like, oh, that's cool. And then they might tell that story too. But it's not dogmatic in either group, I don't think. I think it's more like a framing narrative to hint at deeper truths as opposed to a literal, actual origin stories that's dogmatically stuck to. Like, I could imagine other Sandman having very different words for things, different descriptions.
Yeah, but considering like Kithbook Sator's history stuff, talking about like the gods being she and everything, I think some changelings would look at that and say, "Oh yeah, of course."
Oh yeah, no, I don't think I think changelings get around and have these chats with what sound like completely incompatible mythologies, and they're like, "Sure, why not?" And then they'd hear this one, it's like both the Sandman and the Changeling would all be like, "Sure," if they just tell each other the stories, right? Like, I don't think it'll.
Yeah. It's fundamentally self-aggrandizing.
Yeah. Wraith does have more dogmatic origin story, like mythologies, but I don't think this is one of them. This is not part of the heretics worrying about your afterlife and talking about what you need to do now.
Yeah. This is maybe the most postmodern expression of the Wraith theology.
Yeah. It feels like the most changeling expression of Wraith
Same thing.
theology. Yeah.
Thanks for the questions.
Yes.
Peoples. Josh, if people want to submit other questions, what could they do?
Well, they could send us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. They can join our Discord, discord.me/CTP. They can leave a comment on our website, changelingthepodcast.com. If you're listening on Facebook, go ahead and leave a comment there, Changeling the Podcast. We're also on Patreon for Changeling the Podcast, and we're on Mastodon, changelingpod@dice.camp.
Links to all of which will be provided in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain Puka.
And remember, Sandman dream figures have lots of wavy hair like Liberace.
I mean, I'm into it. Notice, there is said to be a particularly foul group of specters prowling the Shadowlands at present, subjecting any unfortunate dead they come across to performances of the musicals of Andrew Lloyd Webber. Led by former Sandmen and twisted chanteurs, they make use of the Arcanos of Phantasm to create gossamer technicolor dreamcoats and pearlescent half-masks, deploy keening to inject maximum pathos into their solos, and rely on hive mind to ensure a well-coordinated show. Other ghostly assets of the Shadowlands are brought in from time to time. The Moliate Arcanos allowed the troupe to inflict cats on a hapless cohort of wraiths, and lately they have been spotted practicing loops on relic roller skates at an unacceptable proximity to the Midnight Express train running through the Shadowlands. Time will only tell what they're up to next. If you'd like to be kept apprised of these and other bulletins from our underworld blotter, do stop by our Discord community at www.discord.me/CTP to hang out and chat with us. You can also support our show by signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and get a shout-out like the following excellencies: Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Elleris, Hugo the Bogperson, Iabol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razgabooz, Sandjigger, Sija, and Simon Strand. Many spoopy thanks to them. Please also feel free to leave us a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience and or tell your friends and attending spirits about our show. Take care, break a metaphorical leg, and for the Sandman's sake, keep on dreaming.